The attraction of seashells as decoration is explained in the pages of Barbara Jones' book Follies and Grottos. Nothing about a shell is quite as it appears to be at first glance. Tiger shells look sharply black and white, but the stripes and spots are never truly regular, ultimately unresolvable, and never quite black or quite clear, but swimming slightly as in the tides of some solid sea. There is no edge to and no possibility of matching the soft or rosy pinks that flush within so many shells. The color retreats to the heart of the spiral as we look or sinks below the indefinite surface, soft and warm to the eye, hard and cool beneath the finger, matte and gleaming at once chalk and china. As the fashion took hold, huge numbers of seashells, ranging from exotic examples from the West Indies to more common varieties found on our coasts, were imported. Susanna, Viscountess Fane, was reputed to have spent a sum 3 times the value of her house on her grotto, while Arthur Chichester, the third Earl of Donegal, was particularly criticized for his profligacy in acquiring shells, thousands of which were never used. As Naomi Miller points out, as gardens changed in the course of the century, so too did grottos. From walls densely covered with shells, grottos assumed a more natural appearance, often bleak and cavernous and evoking a sense of delightful horror. Snail shells were still used, but more selectively. Thomas Goldney, a Quaker merchant, constructed a cave encrusted with exotic species from the West Indies and Africa, as well as native species in Clifton. It had a wilder, more naturalistic appearance than the ones at Woburn and Skipton. Still more grottos were designed to show off their owner's collection of seashells. At Goodwood Park in West Sussex in the 1700s, Sarah Lennox, Duchess of Richmond, and her daughters spent 7 years creating a Georgian pavilion lined with thousands of shells and pieces of mirrored glass. Everything except the floor, the fireplace, and skirting was constructed from seashells, placed with care and precision to give an unusual effect. By the end of the 18th century, a grotto composed of ear shells, top shells, and mussels had become a selling feature for a country house, analogous to a conservatory or swimming pool today. Not just grottos, but household items such as vanity cases, caskets, and snuff boxes were smothered in the shells of small snails, giving rise to a style known as rocaille. By the 19th century, shellwork had spread to places of entertainment. Shells were used to decorate gardens, tea shops, and conservatories, and in the manufacture of gifts such as sailors' valentines. Here, the shells of small marine snails were arranged as a mosaic on a paper base in octagonal wooden boxes and sold to sailors on voyages to the West Indies as a gift for their loved ones back home. Included in the design was a message or token of love. Their production became a cottage industry on the Caribbean island of Barbados. Having become so popular, the fashion for grottos and shell work was destined to wane, and as Tim Knox, architectural historian of the National Trust, observed, the fashion for grottos passed, except for tiny and crude echoes in suburban back gardens or cheap sideshows in seaside resorts. Where grottos did survive, they mostly slid into disrepair. Shell figurines, brooches, snail-encrusted picture frames, and crucifixes have become a legacy of an age when the snail shell reigned supreme as an ornamental item. There remain a few hopeful signs. A new shell grotto was created at the Menagerie at Houghton, not far from the old one at Woburn, in 1996 under the direction of Christopher Hobbs. Here, in a cellar, a world of glistening omars, mother of pearl, and snail-encrusted mirrors was created, together with a fountain, a marble Orpheus, and a three-headed dog with a tail spiked with ogre shells. Charkley Court, former home of the newspaper tycoon Lord Beaverbrook, opened its doors to the public, and with it went on display a new shell grotto designed by Belinda Eade. Shells imported from Japan, Australia, Australia, and the South Pacific successfully created a variety of textures, from smooth to craggy, in a vault below the staircase leading from house to garden. Eade has taken for her inspiration the Greek myth of Arethusa, a nymph who was transformed into a fountain, with Robert Myers incorporating shell and pebble grotto niches into his award-winning garden at Chelsea in 2007, and the success of Blot Carr Wilson in her imaginative use of shells in decorating buildings here and abroad. A revival of interest in this type of snail art may well be underway. The traditional spiral shape of the snail shell has influenced both designers and architects. From hats to earrings to items of pottery, there is something intrinsically satisfying about the logarithmic spiral. A trip to Rome will quickly convince anyone in doubt of its strong influence on architecture. Spiral features abound, from staircases to rolled volutes at the top of iconic columns. Borromini, the great Baroque church architect, is believed to have been inspired by one of his own shells when he designed the spiral lantern tower above the dome of the chapel of Sant'Ivo alla Sapienza. No fountain in the city appears complete without tritons blowing jets of water from conch shells. It is said that Leonard himself was inspired to design the spiral staircase at Blois by looking at the snail, and in Spain, Such staircases are actually known as escalera de caracol, snail staircases. Some believe that the Japanese drew inspiration from snail shells when designing their temples and pagodas. That is certainly true of Frank Lloyd Wright when he conceived the spiral ramp, a distinguishing feature of the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum in New York. The design is strongly reminiscent of the upturned shell of the Thacheria mirabilis. The same spiral motif can be seen in the spiral minaret of the Great Mosque in Samarra. Described as the Malwiya snail, this remarkable construction in mud and brick was built by the Caliph al-Mutawakkil in the 9th century. It is 164 feet high and was described by a traveler in 1636 as a twirling periwinkle. Sadly, its top was damaged in the Iraq War. Vladimir Tatlin, one of the founders of the movement known as constructivism, which originated in Moscow just after the First World War, designed a monument based on a double spiral with a strong resemblance to a snail. Using steel and glass, it would have dwarfed the Eiffel Tower had it been built. The structure, a monument to the Third International, only ever existed as a model. It proved too expensive to build. A concern with spirals wasn't just the preoccupation of a few architects. Sculptors too tried their hands at experimenting with the spiral form. For Louis Bourgeois, the spiral was an attempt at controlling the chaos. The layer 1962 is distinctly snail-like, offering on the one hand protection and a place to hide, and on the other hand signaling a trap into which the unwary may be lured. For the Canadian John McNabb, the snail shell is an expression of order and beauty, but the ultimate in spiral abstraction is to be found in a famous picture by Matisse of the snail. Started towards the end of his life as a series of drawings of a garden snail, it became transformed into a spiral of colored paper cutouts mounted on canvas. Matisse himself said of the creative process, I first of all drew the snail from nature holding it. I became aware of an unrolling. I found an image in my mind purified on the shell of the shell. Then I took the scissors. In a series of numbers that describes the spiral shape of the snail shell, each term is the sum of the two preceding terms. The ratio of each term to the one before gradually converges to a limit called golden mean. The same ratio is also known as the divine proportion. Doubtless this explains why the snail shell had been such a source of inspiration to artists worldwide, why it has become a symbolic object, and why it is so extensively copied and used as decorative motif. Shell necklaces made of snails form traditional dress in Papua New Guinea. A modern bracelet made from snail shells. The Lord's Prayer engraved on the surface of this tiger cowrie. Detail from a 12th century mosaic in San Clemente, Rome, showing a snail being pursued by a bird. Thomas de Crit's portrait of John Tradescant the Younger with Roger Friend and a collection of exotic shells. 1645, oil on canvas. The Tradescant father and son were keen collectors of exotic seashells, and their holdings formed the basis of the Ashmolean collection. There is a wealth of snails in Jan van Kessel's 1654 oil still life of shells and flowers. Notice the one emerging from its shell in the center of the picture. As well as being a notable collector of shells, Alberta Sieber was fond of arranging them in patterns and creating faces, as seen in this 1734 Cabinet of Natural Curiosities. The marble cone shell in Rembrandt's 1650 etching, the shell is a mirror image of the actual cone shell, Conus marmoreus. A typical sailor's valentine housed in its octagonal box. Kitao Shigenasa carved wooden nitsuke of a snail on a tub. It is thought that the Japanese wonder shell, Thacheria mirabilis, inspired Frank Lloyd Wright's Guggenheim Museum in New York. What remains of the 9th century spiral minaret can still be seen at the Great Mosque in Samarra, Iraq. The spiral stair of a lighthouse resembles the coiling of a snail. Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec's snail lithographed for Jules Renard's 1899 Historia Naturalis. Immobile in the cold season, his giraffe-like neck withdrawn, the snail sits like a bump on a log.